Another raid during Ramadan. Israeli forces storm the Al-Aqsa mosque. Could it provoke a new phase in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? I'm Andrea Sankey, and this is The Newsmakers. Well, for the second successive year, Israeli police have raided one of Islam's holiest sites, the Al-Aqsa mosque. As Palestinian worshippers gathered at the Al-Aqsa compound for morning prayers on Sunday, Israeli forces raided the mosque, leaving at least 19 Palestinians injured. It was the second time in 48 hours police stormed the site. On Friday, just as prayers were coming to an end, a police raid injured 150 Palestinians and led to hundreds of arrests. Israel says those arrested had gathered stones and built barricades to block the arrival of Jewish worshippers. Many inside the compound reported Israeli forces used heavy-handed tactics to push Palestinians out.
We were forced out of Al-Aqsa Mosque after the dawn prayer. Then Jewish settlers started to enter. After we saw two groups of them, we started to chant, and the Israeli forces tried to detain me.
In the wake of the raids, Israel's Prime Minister Naftali Bennett pointed the finger directly at Hamas, accusing them of inciting violence.
I view with the utmost severity the remarks accusing Israel of the violence directed against us. And there are those who are encouraging rock throwing and the use of violence against the citizens of the State of Israel. This is unacceptable to us. This is a reward for the inciters, especially Hamas, which is trying to ignite violence in Jerusalem. We will not allow this to happen. The State of Israel will continue to provide for and safeguard the dignity of all of us, to enable everyone to celebrate in Jerusalem, and most of all, our forces will continue to provide security for the citizens of the State of Israel.
Well, it's a sensitive time in Jerusalem right now. For the first time in more than 30 years, the Islamic month of Ramadan coincides with Jewish Passover. The Al-Aqsa compound is sacred to both Muslims and Jews, and it's been at the center of several escalations. Last year in May, Israeli police repeatedly raided the mosque, sometimes during prayers toward the end of Ramadan. That sparked a deadly 11-day war between Israel and Hamas, killing more than 250 Palestinians and 12 Israelis. Now, there are fears a new conflict could erupt. On Tuesday, Israeli fighter jets carried out a series of airstrikes on the Gaza Strip in response to what it says were rockets fired into Israel on Monday. Washington is urging both sides to exercise restraint.
We, as we did on Friday, continue to call on all sides to exercise restraint, to avoid provocative actions and rhetoric, and preserve the historic status quo on the Haram al-Sharif Temple Mount. We also continue to urge Israeli and Palestinian officials to work cooperatively to lower tensions and ensure the safety of everyone.
Unfortunately, working together cooperatively hasn't been easy in this conflict. So, joining me now to discuss where the latest escalation actually takes things are, from West Jerusalem, Danny Ayalon, Israel's former deputy foreign minister. From Ramallah in the occupied West Bank is former Palestinian Authority spokesperson Nour Odeh, and also from Ramallah, Mustafa Barghouti, the Secretary General of the Palestinian National Initiative. Thanks all so much for being with us. I first want to establish why this actually happened. So, Danny Ayalon, if you can, help us understand why entering this site is so important for the people that wanted to enter on both Friday and Sunday. And is it worth the cost and complexity of protecting them just to go inside that compound?
Well, Andrea, I guess we have a very explosive time now because of the convergence of Ramadan with the Pesach, with the Jewish Passover. Jewish Passover is one of the three, what we call the highest holidays, where there is pilgrimage to Jerusalem and to the Temple Mount. In the old days, they were sacrificing, they were ordering or giving sacrifices there to God. I must tell you now that since the destruction of the Second Temple, there were no sacrifices given there, and quite a few, or I would say most Jewish rabbis now forbid doing any sacrifices. However, there is a nationalistic movement here of Jewish groups that would like to establish presence over there. They claim against the Israeli government, by the way, that Israel does not keep the, I would say, the openness of worship or freedom of worship to all religions, because according to an agreement that Israel had with the Palestinian Authority and with Jordan, I think it was 2015, that the status quo was that Muslims can pray on the Mount, Jews and Christians can only come there and attend in attendance. However, we're trying to defy that. So this is causing some concern. Israeli, of course, authorities are trying to prevent it. But on the other hand, Andrea, and this also makes a much more complicated situation, is that there is a lot of fake news and there's a lot of Islamic sites and Hamas especially, and also the Islamic movement in Israel that are inciting, sending fake news as if Israel is going to change the status quo, as Israel is going to make different
I'll tell you what,
over there, which is not the case.
Before you go too far, because I do want to talk about those elements that you've mentioned, what you consider fake news. But let me just check in with Nour on your first point. I mean, Nour, is a big part of this just actually, bad timing in a sense, the overlapping of Passover and Ramadan, with making some very heightened sensitivities for those who want to worship in the Al-Aqsa compound?
Well, let's just, get things back to basics. The fact that Ramadan and Christian Easter and the Passover holidays are coinciding this year, it was only an opportunity to further highlight how untenable the situation in Jerusalem is. Under occupation, Palestinians deprived of their national rights, of civil rights, and of any horizon for a breakthrough. That combination, that untenable combination of systemic oppression and state violence, combine that with heightened tensions at the religious front and the provocations that are almost at on a daily basis, the entry of Israeli soldiers and the use of force, the destruction of property, the assaults on worshippers, the propaganda also by Israeli right-wing groups, calling for the sacrifices. We've seen a few settlers trying and attempting to enter in a clandestine manner to the holy compound. All of that create an explosive situation. And let me be very honest. The fact is the current Israeli government has no problem playing on both ends, playing on both sides. On the one hand, it wants to appease the right wing because it's facing political problems. And on the other, it wants to claim to the Palestinians, to Jordan, and to the rest of the international community that it respects the status quo, that it's not the part that's doing the provocations, forgetting all the while that the occupation and its policies are a daily provocation for the Palestinian people. The continuation of this occupation, ignoring it, and preferring to talk about everything else and with everyone else except about the central issue, makes everything explosive, not just in Jerusalem, but across the occupied territory.
Okay, Danny Ayalon, I just have to get your response to that. I mean, do you agree in part that maybe there is an oversimplification and this is not, just a one-off, Ramadan and Passover coinciding? And also, is the Israeli government here straight out being duplicitous in its role?
I think that it's a no-brainer to surmise, and not just surmise, more than that Israel has no interest whatsoever to have any violence on the mountain. It's under Israeli control, Israeli sovereignty, and certainly we do not need these headaches, so to speak. Moreover, we have to remember that for the first time in history, in the Israeli coalition, we have the Israeli Arab Islamic Party is part of the Israeli coalition. So in a way, they are also responsible for the policy. And the policy is freedom of religion, freedom of faith and exercising pilgrimage and everything that goes with it. And first and foremost, keeping the status quo. However, we have to remember that if anything is violating the sacred place, are some, I'm saying some, Muslim attendees on the mountain, which come with cocktails, Molotov cocktails,
Okay.
and with stones and rocks. They have no place in a place of worship. And the Israeli police has only to respond. Israel has not started the provocation. It's responding and trying to actually establish order on this sacred place.
Okay, I do encourage debate. Unfortunately, there is a technical issue with talking over each other. The sound is actually cutting out. Mustafa, I know, I mean, I saw you smirk at part of the reaction, and also that you could have very passionately have something to say. Please do go ahead.
I hope you give me some time to explain. First of all, let's go point by point. I mean, your guest who is defending the Israeli government policy is speaking about freedom of religion. There is no freedom of religion. We don't have access to the Aqsa Mosque. I was personally turned away by the Israeli army 3 times before I managed to get to Jerusalem, and not through the checkpoint. 95% of the Palestinians in Gaza Strip and in the West Bank and Palestinians in diaspora are not allowed to access Jerusalem or access religious places. So they are forbidden from practicing their religious practice, from worshipping in the Aqsa Mosque. The same applies to the vast majority of Palestinian Christians who could not celebrate Easter in Jerusalem because they are prohibited from reaching there. That's first. Second, what happened in the Aqsa Mosque, and I was a witness to that on Friday, was a vicious, aggressive attack on peaceful worshippers. One of them was 15 years old, who was hit with what they call rubber bullets, but they are not rubber bullets. They are metallic canisters that were hit at people from very close distance. 20 people had brain injury and brain bleeding and had to go through craniotomy, surgical procedure. One of the people who were hit was a 79-year-old man. I saw him myself in the hospital. He was hit in the face. So the Israeli army attacked the people, attacked the peaceful worshippers for no reason whatsoever. And the attacks continued from 5 in the morning till 10 in the morning. 5 hours of attacks on peaceful worshippers. And this repeats every morning. The other problem is that this whole policy of Israel is very much related to the fact that we have the longest occupation in modern history. 55 years of military occupation, by which law the Israeli army has the right to enter a worshipping place like the Aqsa Mosque, by which law the Israeli army does not allow people to access Jerusalem. They are occupying us and they are oppressing us. And in addition to that, they have created the worst system of apartheid in modern history, actually ever. The people who visit us from South Africa always say this is the worst system of apartheid we've ever seen. It's the longest occupation. Ethnic cleansing has taken place in 1948, and since then, millions of Palestinian refugees are not allowed to come back. And at the end of the day, they claim that Palestine, the whole of Palestine, which they call Eretz Israel, is a place only for Jewish people. This is a racist, discriminatory policy. And this is the cause of all problems, including the violence that is happening.
We can all agree now, clearly, that this is not a one-off, just because of the timing and some pressure that was put on by some more extreme elements in Israel wanting to come into a sacred place during Ramadan. But there's also this issue that Mustafa was pointing out. If we've lost Danny again, Danny, I think you're there. Do you accept that, I mean, the ground reality, what is happening on the ground, you may have an official party policy, may have an official government policy, I think we have you back, but that differs greatly from what is actually enforced and done by Israeli security forces to Palestinians on the ground. So you can say this is what the Israeli government is responsible for, but what the police do and what is tacitly backed then by the Israeli government is quite different. And it's horrific for Palestinians.
Well, if it's horrific for Palestinians, I don't know. It's more horrific for Jews. 15 Jewish innocent people were just victimized, were brutalized, were killed incessantly by Palestinian terrorists. And I want to make one point
how many
here.
Palestinians killed
Wait
since
a
the
minute.
beginning?
You want to make
Okay, let's let Danny make his point,
Yeah,
and we'll come
yeah.
back.
What I see from Mr. Barghouti,
No, he should
that
mention the names of the people who were killed, Palestinians
yeah,
as well.
just
Okay,
yeah,
but let him make his point. And we'll try to have a. Go ahead.
Just to say to Mr. Barghouti that I have seen now historically, Palestinians like to bask in their victimhood, which they are solely responsible for. Because
This is very
until now,
racist,
we
and
do
we should not be
accept the
entertaining
fact
this in a
that
conversation.
This is our
La, la,
home.
la.
Has always been our home,
About the
historical home,
Holocaust.
and we are ready to share it.
Okay,
We
it
have
looks
been
like we're
ready-
turning back to the justification of the
La, la,
foundations
la,
of the
la,
country.
la.
Nour, I would like, I'd like
And
you.
by the way, and
It seems we've lost Danny Ayalon.
I'm
Nour,
back.
do go ahead. I need to give Nour equal time as well. Go ahead.
Sure.
First of all, let's just get something very clear. The reduction of any discussion about Palestine and the Israeli occupation to the kind of racist rhetoric that we just heard is not just unacceptable, it's a waste of time. And it's disrespectful to the audience. The Palestinian people are not a group of migrants that suddenly appeared on the land of Palestine. The historical roots and the belonging of the Palestinian people is not in question. This is not about Israeli generosity to share
By
a
the way,
land.
neither is the Jewish.
This is about international law. No. When you recognize my humanity, sir, then I can actually engage with you. Right now, you're reducing my humanity, and you're accusing an entire people of enjoying to be victims.
No, I'm sorry.
Correct
You
your
have to speak to the
perspective.
historic facts.
Correct your perspective. Accept that we are equal in our humanity. Accept
Of course,
that there
we're
is
equal to
something
our
called
humanity.
no. Your
Even
narrative
you are
does
not
not reflect that.
Even you are not
Your
accepting a
narrative
right.
does not accept.
This is
Your narrative
just not
clearly
true. Israel
Okay.
is
I'd like to.
democratic country in the region.
There is such a
And we
thing.
are
There
not
is such a thing.
apartheid. You are trying a political
are.
warfare against Israel because you do not want to engage. You do not want to have any concessions.
I
tell
have
you
to.
a story.
Unfortunately, when you're all speaking over each other, the sound cuts out on both ends, so it's hard to hear what anyone has to say. Nour, please go ahead. If you can let Nour finish, we're going to try and conduct this one person at a time. It doesn't work to speak over each other. Nour, do go ahead. Finish your thoughts.
Look, the only acceptable standard of conduct for states, at least at this point in history, is international law. Israel, as the occupier, stands in violation of those laws. International experts and human rights organizations unanimously agree that in order for Israel to maintain its colonial occupation, it has installed a regime of apartheid. Now, that is established. That's a fact. That's a legal qualification that experts agree on. The current Israeli government, even though it has a token a Palestinian Israeli party that runs on an Islamic agenda that nobody really buys, even inside Israel, this government refuses to talk to the Palestinians, refuses to discuss anything even close to a political horizon, rejects the idea of Palestinian statehood, rejects the idea of the applicability of international law. So before we make big allegations, we have to we have to remember the big picture. In order for Palestinians to get to Al-Aqsa, they need to go through checkpoints, humiliating military checkpoints, where most of them are turned away. In order for them to enter Al-Aqsa, once they've got into Jerusalem, they have to go through more Israeli soldiers across the old city. This is not an issue about keeping the peace. This is an issue about an occupier that wants to maintain hegemony in violation of its obligations and in violation of international law, at the cost not just of Palestinian rights, but Palestinian lives. Over 45 Palestinians have been killed since the beginning of the year. We just buried an 18-year-old a high school student who was on her way to get special classes for English in preparation for her final exams. She was killed during one of many Israeli raids in Jenin. So let's not, reduce things and deflect from the fundamentals of the situation. This is a situation of occupier and occupied. There is no parity. There is no balance here. The situation is inherently imbalanced.
You know, it's fascinating to hear both sides actually mention the victimhood complex, if I can put it as that, because so many will argue that, Israel was founded on a sense of being victims and that they deserve the right to the state because of persecution. And Danny, to hear you say that the Palestinians are using this victimhood to kind of justify actions unfairly, it's hard to reconcile how there can ever be some kind of proper negotiation when each side sees each other as using these tactics. I mean, I don't know how it works.
Andrea, you're absolutely right. As long as each side entrenches in their own narratives, there's not going to be peace. Unfortunately for the Palestinians, they are on their own. Nobody in the Arab world respects their rights, and we see a new Middle East where all Arab countries are reaching for diplomatic relations with Israel.
But Danny, are you not entrenched in your own narrative as well? I mean, going back thousands of years?
Let's go with a very, very quickly through the facts. 1947, UN resolution, anybody who's talking about international law in quite of self-respect would realize that 1947, when the Jews accepted the partition, the Arabs did not. That started, or at least that really aggravated the situation as we are here. But since then until now, I can count at least 5 times where Israel was willing and offering a far-reaching compromise to no avail, where the Palestinians refused because they still teach in their schools. Wait a minute, let me finish. When they still teach in their schools, not only to liberate what they call the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, but to liberate Haifa and Tel Aviv and where I live here now in Israel, they want us out of here, and there is no way to go around it. They talk about slogans, but as long as they will continue to look back instead of looking into the future, I really feel bad for them because they have been led by successful, I would say, a leadership that were not really true to the real interest of the Palestinian people. And the result of this quote-unquote occupation is them. There are two sides to the story. Israel was trying to disengage.
Let me
when they are running after us and trying to kill us.
Again,
we are here, we've been here, we'll continue to be here.
Equal time. Mustafa Barghouti, I have to come back to you. We have our last few minutes left. I mean, something has to give. What happens next? Can it only get worse then?
Listen, I did not interrupt this time, and I hope he doesn't interrupt me. First of all, we do not want any Palestinian or Israeli to die. We want everybody to live. We want everybody to be happy. But the reality of the matter here is that Israel is the side that is occupying the other one. And it's not true that Israel accepted 1947 partition plan. This is not true. Avi Shlaim, a very well and highly respected historian who's Israeli in Oxford University, proved that there wasn't a single document where the Israeli government accepted 1947 partition. But that's not the issue. If they accept two-state solution, why don't they allow us to be having a state in West Bank and Gaza Strip and East Jerusalem, which is a very big concession from the side of Palestinians? They don't,
because they have to stop.
They don't want Palestinians, don't interrupt me, because they do not want Palestinians to have a state of their own. They do not want Palestinians to have equality. If we are equal, why self-determination is only for Jewish people in Israel itself, while there are 2 million Palestinians living there? If they really speak about peace, why they continue this aggression? Look at the pictures. You have a full army inside a mosque, inside a worshipping place. If they really want peace, why they continue the siege on Gaza? If they want really peace, why they continue settlement activities in the West Bank? The settlement activities mean that they want to annex the whole of the West Bank. And the reality of the matter, regardless of what your guest says, is that this Israeli establishment, this Zionist movement, does not believe in the rights of the Palestinian people to be equal, does not believe in the right of the Palestinian people to be free. And as they have evicted 70% of us in 1948 through massacre, they still dream about the fact that we will leave this country. I am telling him, and I hope he passes that to his friends, we are here to stay. We're not leaving anywhere. And
Mustafa
Palestinians are
Barghouti.
determined to be free. And one day we will not only be free, but this system of apartheid should fall apart, not only in the West Bank and Gaza, but also inside 1948 areas. Yes, because you are practicing apartheid. And that is not what I say. This is what Amnesty International says. This is what Human Rights Watch is saying. This is what Israeli human rights organizations like B'Tselem is saying. There is
Okay.
no way for occupation and apartheid to continue.
Okay.
This is not sustainable, and it's bad for both people.
Mustafa Barghouti, unfortunately, we are completely over time, actually. I'd like to thank you and Nour Odeh and, of course, Ayalon, all for joining us on this edition of the Newsmakers. Before we go, we can leave you with pictures of the raid on the Al-Aqsa Mosque. I'm Andrea Sankey. Thanks for watching.